Welcome to Underworld UK, where Britain's darkest stories are brought to light. From the gritty streets of gangland London, Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham, from Curtis Warren to the Cray twins to county lines and modern day true crime, we cover everything. Bringing you new videos every week. Subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next video is put out.
The Doddington original gangsters, often referred to as the DOG or the Doddington Gang, is a notorious, primarily Afro-Caribbean street gang that originated in the Moss Side area of Manchester, UK, during the late 1980s. Named after Doddington Close in Moss Side, the gang evolved from a group known as the Pepperhill Crew. They historically controlled the east side of the Alexandra Park estate in Moss Side and maintained a fierce, long-standing rivalry with the neighbouring Gooch Close gang. The gang was deeply involved in the drug trade, particularly crack cocaine and heroin, and was involved in violent turf wars for control of illegal drug supply in South Manchester. During the 1990s and 2000s, the battle between the Doddington and Gooch gangs over turf led to a sharp increase in gun violence, giving Manchester the nickname Gunchester violence. The conflict resulted in numerous deaths, including innocent bystanders. Notable incidents included the 2006 murder of schoolboy Jesse James and the 2007 murders of Eucal Chin and Tyrone Gilbert Evolution, following pressure from police and the death of key leaders, such as Raymond Pitt in 1995. The gang structure changed, with new factions like the Pit Bull Crew emerging. Operation Excalibur, Greater Manchester Police launched a dedicated Operation Excal in response to the violence, which included a plainclothes team targeting gang members. Convictions: a 2009 trial for the rival Gooch gang members who faced a wall of silence from the community saw major convictions, which significantly disrupted the gang landscape in South Manchester present day, while the intense, highly public gang wars of the 1990s and 2000s have significantly decreased. Police have continued to make arrests for gang-related activity, drug trafficking and firearm possession involving newer, fragmented groups connected to these older gangs. Unrule OF, a successful drugs pitch is that you never rip off your customers. It was a rule the young Doddington broke, without hesitation. I watched somebody serve a punter, and before the guy returned to his car, he grabbed him, punched him, took the drugs back off him and the rest of his money, his watch, his bracelet and rings and his car keys, and told him to get off the estate, said Anthony Stevens. What is the sense in that? Beating up your source of income. This seemed to be the order of the day. They were all doing it for a laugh. Typical was an incident outside the West Indian Sports and Social Club in Moss Side, where the Doddies sometimes hung out. Drug user Sydney Reynolds and a female companion had driven to Moss Side to make a buy. The woman went into the club while Reynolds, who was already smacked up, stayed, slumped in the back seat. 16-year-old Dean Laycock followed her back to the car to steal her money, and Reynolds, a big, powerful man, jumped out and grabbed him in a headlock. They fell to the floor. "Where's my ting?" shouted Laycock. Ting was slang for a gun. Another youth appeared. "Where shall I pop him?" he shouted. "Pop him in the leg," said Laycock. A bullet tore through Reynolds' thigh and into his heel, smashing the bone to pieces. Laycock was later convicted of assault with intent to rob and wounding with intent. The jury chose not to believe his alibi that he was at home looking after his pet chinchillas, nor his assertion that the Doddington was a football club and bandanas were worn to keep warm in Moss Side. Tommy Pitt, also 16, was cleared of being the gunman. He was, however, incarcerated for a year, the maximum allowed. For his age, for a fray and possessing a loaded firearm in a public place for shooting above the crowd in a nightclub. Another Doddy, Tony McElroy, shot at 2 customers with a Luger when they complained about the poor quality of his heroin. It was not for lack of trying that you failed to kill both addicts. Mr. Justice Morrison told him at Manchester Crown Court, pointing out that there were 207 gun-related crimes in the Hulme and Moss Side areas in the final 6 months of 1993. The problem is made worse by the difficulty of persuading witnesses to give evidence, he added. I saw for myself the way you sat in the dock, staring at the witnesses in this case, no doubt hoping they would be frightened to give evidence against you.
He jailed the arrogant young gunman for 18 years. They didn't seem to understand that while they were doing that, the amount of people who had the nerve to come back was dwindling by the day, said Anthony Stevens. These punters thought, why on earth should I go down there just to get taxed? Lot then started to think, what they are doing isn't so hard. Why? Don't I just buy drugs in a big quantity for myself and certain mates and become a dealer myself in my little estate, miles away? This is what happened. So all these groups of guys who used to stand about are now fighting over an ever-decreasing market, and it has become more and more desperate. All of a sudden it is not a laugh anymore. So people have decided, right, what we will do now is we will take money from people who have made it illicitly because they can't exactly go to the police. There was a sharp rise in taxing. The Gooch were now the most powerful of the Moss Side gangs. There is no one leader, said a gangland figure at the time. They are quite well organised in terms of drug distribution. They make the Doddies look like ragamuffin tearaways, which they are. They are just guns for hire now. The Gooch are that bit more organised, and the people in charge are a bit better at communication. The Doddies are basically just responsible for taxing.
The young guns got even younger. A police dog sniffed a bag of crack cocaine and heroin dropped by one dealer and managed to follow the scent for half a mile through a maze of alleyways to the house where a 14-year-old was watching TV with his mum. The boy had recently been given bail, charged with 11 offences, including threatening to shoot someone, burglary and possession of heroin when previously arrested at a house in Moss Side. He had been sleeping in a bulletproof vest. His 13-year-old accomplice had been charged with armed robbery and had been on the run from local authority. He had been bailed 10 times by juvenile courts. I feel like King Canute trying to hold back the tide of drugs, admitted Chief Constable David Wilmot. Police alone cannot tackle this problem. We have poured resources into fighting drugs, and the problem has not diminished, it has increased, he cited. The case of a 14-year-old boy on the city's Monsall estate, who made £2,000 a week selling drugs. The boy had recently been convicted but freed by the court and had gone straight back to work. For every dealer we arrest, there are at least another. 10 people willing to take their place, he added. While Salford and Cheetham Hill forged an unholy alliance in their push into the city centre, the Gooch-Doddington War raged, unabated. Old wounds would not heal. In May 1993, Doddington elder Ian MacLeod and a young buck were driving through Moss Side in rush hour when a VW Golf pulled alongside them at a junction. A gunman leaned out and fired several large caliber bullets into MacLeod's vehicle. MacLeod drove off but hit a tree, and a minute later was seen to get out of the car with blood pouring from his neck and head towards the precinct. MacLeod later had a steel plate inserted in his shattered skull. 2 hours later, the gang wars claimed an innocent victim. Anne. Innocent dad called Brian Byrne was crossing a road in Fallowfield when he was fatally struck by a stolen car that was involved in a chase after a shootout. As Mr. Byrne lay dying in the road, a second car pulled up and its occupants threatened witnesses. The dead man left a 10-year-old son orphaned, as the boy's mother had died when he was a baby. The car had been stolen from Cheetham Hill, had been seen earlier cruising the Moss Side Fallowfield area and was later found burned out. In June 1993, there was a car chase and shootout at evening. Rush hour between two gangs in cars in Old Trafford, 8 spent. Cartridges were recovered. Then a Doddington posse on Mountain. Bikes surrounded 19-year-old Warren Williams in his black. BMW on Claremont Road and a hitman dressed in black opened fire. Williams escaped by ducking under the dashboard, then crawling out of the passenger door and jumping onto a passing bus. His car was later found wrecked with 2 bullet holes in her door, covered in Doddington graffiti. The Gooch, who had escaped Operation China, were using as their base the sports pub, a modern, ugly building in Whalley. Range, a fading Victorian enclave that was once the leafy preserve of the old cotton classes, but now blighted by prostitution. The Doddington had made occasional sorties against the sports, but
nothing to match the terror of the 25th of June 1993. 3 men wearing what witnesses described as paramilitary uniforms burst into the pub just before closing time on a Friday night. They had a sub, machine gun, possibly a Thompson, and 2 automatic handguns. Their targets were among a group of about 40 people on a raised section of the busy lounge. One was Adrian Stapleton, whose cousin Carl had been hacked to death by the Doddington 2 years earlier and who had himself cleared of the murder of Darren Samuel. The gunmen stood on seats so they could take level aim and opened fire. It was like the St. Valentine's Day massacre, said a witness. Bullets smacked into walls all over the place, carnage everywhere. Stapleton crumpled as bullets hit him in the mouth, chest, arms and legs. Philip Marshall, aged 27, took a bullet in the mouth and another in the body. Winston Fisher, 27, was also shot. The hit squad fired at least 30 rounds. A massacre was avoided only by chance. The blood-soaked victims were taken to Manchester Royal Infirmary, where armed police stood guard as they underwent surgery. Only close family were allowed in to see them. They would survive, though Stapleton would carry the facial scars for the rest of his life. It was clear that the Doddington Gang now had access to at least 2 machine guns. A different one had been used in an earlier gun battle in Old Trafford.
3 ingredients were making the Manchester underworld uniquely violent. "Whenever we talk drugs now," said Detective Superintendent David Brennan, "we are also talking guns and gangs." Gun crime in Greater Manchester rose by almost 1/3 in 1993. C Division, which included Moss Side and Hulme, saw 295 firearms incidents, including 237 armed robberies, a year-on-year increase of 94%. Early in 1994, the police found 4 AK-47 rifles and 3 submachine guns in the boot of a car near Chawton Street bus station. Guns were coming from numerous sources and they were plentiful, said Anthony Stevens. "I could understand some people who owned a firearm for their own protection, just in case. What really frightened me was the people who carried firearms not for protection, but because they wanted the respect that it gave. People saw them, walking around with a long Mac like they used to 10 years ago. There were people who weren't under any kind of threat, but would walk around with a gun because they knew the street, would part like a sea because you would know that he was one of those gunmen. 300 miles from Manchester, 3 men burst into the gun room in Ivy Bridge near Plymouth and bludgeoned the owner unconscious, fracturing his skull. They tied him up, locked him in a lavatory and stole 41 handguns. Their car was found abandoned, its engine running and its doors flung open in Moss Side, and 2 of the guns were recovered from a drug dealer's house in Sale. 2 Manchester men were later jailed for 12 years for the raid. Though they were white, it was believed they had quickly sold the weapons to the warring black gangs. Another source was Alan Ratcliffe, a balding, bearded, 46-year-old former engineer who had converted the cellar of his modest semi in Farnworth, Bolton, into a legal gun shop with more than 100 weapons, including assault rifles, on display. The house was securely alarmed and locked, but the Tweed jacketed. Ratcliffe was also selling guns illegally. He had an extra license to buy machine guns on condition that he turned them into blank. Fire is to be used only as theatrical props. Instead, he bought a full firing Thompson from a Manchester supplier for £140 and sold it illegally for a reputed £450. It was believed to have ended up in the hands of Moss Side mobsters. Another weapon was used to shoot a gangster in Moss Side in summer 1992, and it was after that a police raid uncovered a pistol hidden in a child's wardrobe. It led to Ratcliffe, who admitted passing it on without a certificate. The majority of the weapons he sold illegally, 17, according to his admissions, were never traced. Dealers buying and selling records were reviewed twice a year, but who they sold to was not thoroughly checked. In July 1994, he was jailed for 3 years after admitting offences of unlawfully transferring firearms. Police were also concerned about legally sold deactivated guns, which were being reactivated for full use. A deact was not classed as a weapon because the barrel had been blocked and
ring pin removed, and so they could be sold openly or by mail. Order, but it was easy for a halfway competent engineer to restore them to working order. D-Axe could be bought in surplus stores, at fairs and through specialist gun magazines. The price was as low as £60, yet once restored, they would sell to criminals for up to £1,000. A gang boss regarded by police as Moss Side's public enemy. No one was finally behind bars today after a series of court dramas. One battle too many with a rival drugs and guns gang sent him into the grateful arms of the law. Today, Delroy Brown, 29, of Gresham Court, Whalley, Range, leader of the Pepper Hill mob, was beginning a 6-year jail term and cursing his Gooch Gang enemies. Lady Luck, which had seen Delroy survive various attempts on his life, finally deserted him in a clash with the Gooch boys. Brown would not be heard from again. Having dropped down the rankings, in the words of one officer, he dropped out of sight. He seemed to have come from nowhere, a man with a mystery past, and now he disappeared again. One source claims he returned to the Alexandra Park estate on his release from prison and tried to reassert his authority, only to be beaten up and told to disappear for good. He fled back to Birmingham, leaving a legacy of irreconcilable hatred. In August, one of Brown's protégés, Winston Brownlow, was cleared of attempted murder when the victim told a court he was no longer certain Brownlow was the man who shot him because he had bad eyesight and was not wearing his glasses at the time of the attack. "I can't definitely say it was Winston who shot me," testified Carl Ricketts. "I have changed my mind. No one has threatened me." The collapse of gang trials had become the norm. In the same month, Ray Pitt of the Doddington was jailed for contempt of court for refusing to testify against a man accused of shooting him. The kind of intimidation witnesses could face was revealed in another trial. A young man called John Mack had been shot 3 times in Longsight. One of his former school friends was charged. Mack himself was later arrested for robbery, only to find himself in a cell in Hindley Remand Centre near to his alleged attacker. He was assaulted just before he was due to leave for court to give evidence, and was given messages by his assailant's friends that he and his family would be shot dead if he testified. "I have been assaulted twice," he told the court. Masked men had also attacked the home where his pregnant girlfriend lived with their baby daughter. The judge accepted that, because of the duress, Mack could not be jailed for contempt, and the man accused of shooting him walked free. October 1993 saw a pitched gun battle in Alexandra Road. A drug buyer mugged and shot on the Alex estate, a kneecapping. Outside a Stretford snooker hall, a Doddington soldier shot in the leg in Longsight, and 3 people shot as they sat in a car in Chorlton. Recorder Rhys Davies, Manchester's leading judge, warned of having to impose deterrent sentences to curb the massive rise in firearms-related offences. He said 10 years ago, there had been 107 such offences. In 1993 they were expected to top 1,400. A Manchester police officer wrote to Police Review magazine demanding that he and his colleagues be armed. 4 days after the judge's comments, the young Gooch trapped 2 men at a bonfire night party. Their victims had been part of a crowd of several hundred at the Guy Fawkes evening laid on by a local youth project in Quinney Crescent, when a gang of 4 young men let off at least 4 shots from a shotgun. One of their victims was Doddington member Kevin Lewis, 22, who had already been shot at least once before. A few days later, another attack was made on a Doddington redoubt. A gunman hiding behind bushes opened fire with a shotgun on a group of young friends. They were chased into a house, and one 14-year-old was hit in the head and legs by pellets and shattered glass from the door panel he hid behind. They hit the lights and lay in the dark for 15 minutes until the coast was clear. Doddington youth Julian Turbo Stewart had survived one attempt on his life when his body armour deflected a bullet. He had walked free from charges of murder, attempted murder and wounding. Lately, Turbo had been upsetting some of the Gooch. He spoke with Anthony Stevens, an intelligent and level-headed older man who had been through similar experiences, and expressed confusion at his inability to escape the world he was in. The Gooch was still after him. He wore a vest all the time and was constantly looking over his shoulder. Yet he had not reached that crucial decision to get out. On a cold January day in 1994, Stewart and a friend, Terence, Wilson, were chased across Princess Parkway by two mixed race men, one shouting, "You're dead." Later, they were in Radley. Walk off the notorious Quinney Crescent, a loop around the east side of the estate that marked the edge of Doddington home turf. A black man approached them, asking for drugs. He wore dated clothes, suggesting he might recently have left prison. He started to get friendly by referring to someone he knew who was also a friend of mine, Wilson later told an inquest. But I was cautious about him because I didn't know who he was or what he really wanted. The man asked them their names. Stewart said his was Turbo, and the three shook hands. Wilson said he was just about to walk away when he heard a bang. I saw the flash and Turbo fell to the ground. It looked like an automatic handgun, but things happened so fast. A car screeched up a passageway and I ran because I felt it was connected. Stewart had taken a single shot to the left side of his head. He died within seconds, wearing his bulletproof vest and carrying £4,000 in cash.
Sonia Stewart was told of her son's death by a relative and was taken to the scene. Due to a delay in forensic experts reaching the scene, his body lay in the street for several hours, only partially covered. Obviously, I was very distressed, but even more so because of the fact that he was left lying there, which I thought was totally unnecessary, very disrespectful. There was a lot of feeling in the community that that shouldn't have been so. He wasn't removed and he wasn't covered. It was very distressing because I could see part of his body. The investigating superintendent called it a cold-blooded assassination, one of the worst I have seen. The newspapers described Stewart as a second lieutenant in the Doddington Gang. The police authority offered a £10,000 reward for information. More than 1,600 people were interviewed in the subsequent inquiry, and 131 made detailed statements. Yet no one was able or willing to identify the gunman believed to be a hitman brought in by the Gooch to take care of Turbo. Sonia Stewart was a dignified lady who worked for the city council. Like many of the mothers who would lose sons to the gang war, her son had kept her in the dark about his life, even when he had once before been shot. I only knew quite a while after it, actually. Someone told me about it. I didn't know why it had happened. Julian wasn't living with me and hadn't for some time, so I didn't know what his business was. I tried through other family members to keep a track of whether he was okay or not, but that is basically it. She did not believe that the street gangs were heavily organised. I think that is just dramatics by the media to get a good story. I think they are young men who need a lot of help. A lot of them don't see a future for themselves either educationally or in terms of employment, but I don't think they are listened to. They are not taken seriously. And then it is a case of, well, why bother? It is very sad. A lot of them are just young boys with nothing better to do. The way they are described sometimes, as if they are the mafia, is very unfair. A lot of them need help with their education, with employment. Julian, as far as I'm concerned, was very naive, like a lot of other young men today who think they know everything but don't. He might have just got caught up in something that he didn't expect. I would like the media to be fairer in how they portray Moss Side, fairer in how they portray young black men in general. The way it is all dramatised in the press, it gives a very, very bad impression, and it won't help the people in the area. Crime isn't just young black people. This sort of incident can happen to anyone's son. You don't have to be from a certain background or certain colour for it to happen to you. I don't blame myself. Julian was disciplined, in fact to the point where he thought I was too. Strict, and he often said that to me. He was brought up properly. Several men would be arrested, but no one was ever tried for his death. He was one of an early wave of youngsters who died, unnecessarily because of unscrupulous people above them who used them as cannon fodder, said Anthony Stevens. There would be many more to come. February 1994 saw builders move in to start demolishing parts of the Alex Park estate. 50 houses would be knocked down to be replaced by new homes built by a housing association, and
98 others substantially renovated. The narrow and secluded walkways and isolated open spaces would go. Play and recreational areas were to be improved. The changes were intended partly to design out the crime that made domestic life so unbearable. The effects of the work and of the deliberate movement of certain families off the estate, some for good, were not immediately noticeable. Indeed, the Gooch were planning their most brazen act yet to kill a police officer. Certain key figures in the gang had become exasperated by the success of the officer, codenamed Delta, whose work in cultivating top-level informants was yielding excellent inside intelligence. So one of the Gooch leaders hatched a plot to pass on to Delta bogus information that a large amount of ammunition could be found in a disused house in Moss Side. Delta had received similar tips before, and the gang anticipated he would probably check out the house alone at first. The Gooch's main gunman would be waiting with a revolver, obtained from a source in London, and would shoot Delta dead. Delta's sources were so good that he learned of the plot in advance. He immediately told his boss, and a meeting was arranged with the firearms department. It was agreed that Delta should go along with the plan, with firearms, support, and turn the tables on the waiting gunman. The GMP top brass, however, refused to sanction such a risky operation and instead pulled Delta out of Moss Side. He was ordered not to set foot in the district again. They may have acted with the best of motives, but the decision not only compromised his informant, but also allowed the Gooch's plan to work, wrote one of his former colleagues. Unwittingly, and without firing a shot, they had hamstrung Delta. He had become ineffective. It's impossible to assess what the impact of Delta's withdrawal was, but there would be a firearms incident every 2 days in the Moss Side area in 1994. One of the most serious was an attempt to kill 18-year-old Lawrence Brown, who had previously been cleared of attempted murder charges after the bonfire night shooting of 2 Doddington men. Brown was chased in a Golf in Moss Side and took a bullet. He crashed the car and was found in a doorway by an ambulance crew. Drug dealing had been driven from the Alex estate by the constant warfare. Claremont Road was now the front line. A police observation point on the first floor of a building overlooking the street was sussed out and attacked by a mob, some armed with sticks. There seemed to be no end, no purpose, just a mad whirlwind of taxing, shooting, intimidating, dealing, spending. The older heads were losing influence, losing face. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you are a fan of true crime videos and news, then click like and subscribe. That way you will be notified when I put a new video out, and you will also be helping our channel grow. So a huge thank you. See you next time.